doubtful, afraid or nervous in what I write. So it's something we could probably all use a bit more of, is that space to be curious.
Well, it's interesting that one thing that allows this to happen is the internet, right? The fact that you can publish snippets, that you can engage in dialogue, that you can work out loud, because there are no gatekeepers now to publishing and sharing ideas, or certainly there are less sort of gatekeepers. And I know technology, we haven't talked about it yet, I just want to touch on that, also plays an important role in both your past career and the work that you do today.
Absolutely. I mean, I describe my work as exploring the social age, and somewhat irreverently, I position that. When I drew the front cover for the Social Leadership Handbook, I showed the social age as bursting forth out of the digital age. And I normally like to say we're substantially through the digital age, but not because we haven't seen the proliferation of devices. We're clearly just at the start of that particular journey. But technology for me is enabling. And I should be clear, I don't mean it's enabling good things to happen. It's enabling a whole host of different things to happen. But in general, I'm not explicitly interested in a particular device or technology. I'm extremely interested in what that technology enables us to do. And that's the real excitement for me. So I can I can be as big a nerd as the next person. I can get excited about, all sorts of devices and widgets. But the way that I view technology is it's part of the ecosystem we live within. It puts a selective and evolutionary pressure upon us. And what emerges from that is the thing we really need to understand: the sociology, the structures of society, the structures of organization and power, interpersonal relationships, questions of identity and effect and purpose. All of those are radically transformed by technology. So that's the space that I explore.
Let's dive into some of the sort of core concepts. And I think, Julian, if I'm assuming here that listeners are coming sort of fresh to your work, or relatively fresh to your work. So I want to sort of sketch out you've used the word architecture, the architecture of the work that you do and the thinking that you do and the writing that you do. And I think one of the sort of key foundational concepts is this notion of the social age. Can you tell me what you mean by the social age, and sort of lay out the forces at work from your perspective?
Yeah. So at the simple level, I say the social age is the world that we live in. It's the reality that surrounds us. And I almost can most easily define it by what it is not. And what it is not is the world of yesterday. So we come from a world that was broadly understood. And we have ended up in a world which may look identical as we look out of our window, but is in fact fundamentally different. And what my work explores is how that is different. So half of my work is exploring how it is different. And the other half is thinking, well, what on earth do we do about it? I'll give you some examples. And I should say, I draw a sketch map of the social age every year. I've done that for the last 5 or 6 years. And some aspects remain across all those maps and some of them change. But let me give you a couple of examples. One core feature of the social age is radical connectivity. We come from a world where we were predominantly connected locally and through formal systems within organizations, in the same village and town, in the same office, through postal or email systems that were owned by an organization or formal power. Today, we're connected through many different technologies, nearly all of which are beyond the oversight or control of any government or law enforcement agency or organization. And hence, we have high redundancy in those connections. When I carried out research in the National Health Service in the UK last year, people described technologies they used to be effective on a daily basis. They described 17 different technologies in a cohort of 500 people in that research, 17 technologies they use on a daily basis, 16 of which are not owned by the National Health Service, and they're explicitly forbidden from using them to share patient data or to do their work. So why do they do that? Because questions of uncertainty, of vulnerability, of permanence and ownership and consequence, of trust, dictate our social actions. So understanding the nature of connectivity and how it moves beyond the formal world is central to understanding how you can unlock the social power of an organization. Another aspect you can look at is democratization. Technology has democratized our ability to do almost anything. You used to have an organization to be globally effective, but today what you probably need is a community and access to the democratized technologies of invention, of prototyping, and of effect. Our ability to be effective at scale is no longer held purely within organizations. We've seen the rise of social communities. We've seen the rebalancing of power between formal and social systems. We see a whole range of different effects, which together mean our ecosystem is different. And hence, it's sort of obvious in some ways, as our ecosystem changes, we will need new types of organization. The organizations we have are largely a byproduct of the industrial age. And as we move into a new age, and you don't have to call it the social age, you can call it what you like, but understand how it is different and thinking, well, what type of organization we need and then building it will be the hallmark of those organizations that survive.
Now, a lot of the people that listen to this podcast, and I know, Julian, a lot of the people that you work with find themselves trying to operate in structures that are maybe pre-social age structures. I don't know how you might describe them, but using models from the past. And this is a domain where we all have to practice every day, and it feels often very difficult to do that.
And it is, it's, I suppose I can only share my own understanding of this. The busyness of today is very real, and the organization of today is very real, and we experience it in two ways. One is that it's enabling. Your job title and your job role gives you a space to play. Nearly all of us have some kind of freedom within the environment that we are sat within, but we also experience constraint. So organizational culture does two things. It enables us and constrains us, even the very best culture. So understanding the current organization is important. Understanding the future type of organization is to recognize that we will still need much of what the past gave us. So we are absolutely not in a space where we should be throwing away yesterday's organization. Instead, we should be keeping the very best of it, but leaving behind those things which are outdated. At the same time, we should be building in parallel an entirely new and separate structure, a socially dynamic organization. And this is, at a conceptual level, this is the nature of our challenge. We're moving from a single domain into a multi-domain organization, a single domain organization built upon utilitarian engagement and assets and systems of control and formal power. A socially dynamic organization still has all of that. You still have a job title that was given to you, but you also operate in a reputation economy. We'll still have structures of standardization, of codified strength, replicability at scale that give us global operation. But we'll also be able to change fast. We'll be able to innovate. We will hold a strength that is fluid rather than codified. And, as I say it, I hear myself thinking, well, that all sounds a bit dreamy and abstract. And of course, in some ways, as a foundation, it is, but it will crash right down into individual behaviors. The way that you and I operate on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock will define the ability of the organization to adapt and thrive in this new space. So everything comes down to behavior. So you have to start high, but then you have to get down to the gritty detail.
As people are wired together, as these digital infrastructures are put in place, and so much of our work is mediated through technology, we actually have there's a sort of substrate that we can now kind of examine and research. And it turns out you can get all kinds of even very, very practical insights from seeing how people behave and interact, because it's kind of modeled digitally for you. And indeed, there are companies that now make a living helping people understand the networks within their organization and how information flows. And it absolutely does not map to the formal structures that you would sort of sketch out if you were to draw that organization.
Yeah, and I think that in that example, you illustrate precisely one of the opportunities and risks of the new world. So sometimes we think we've reached our destination too early. So a lot of the sort of social network mapping gives us a view of something, but it is a mistake to believe it gives us a view of the truth. So the thing to remember is that any kind of mapping of interaction gives us one view in a known space. But if people are using technologies that are off-grid, which they predominantly are, and especially if they know they're being observed, which they typically do, you're taking one snapshot, a partial snapshot of the true system. So it's absolutely right to use these kind of tools to give us the kind of insight which you have just had. That's a great reductionist approach. Take the whole system, break it down, look at where the conversations are happening, look at where the good stuff is. But it's completely a mistake to think that what we've been granted is a hallelujah moment and an insight into the answer. What we have got, and this is one of the ways that the market constrains innovation, because if you force somebody to build a business around tools which gives you insight, they will absolutely feel compelled to tell you that what you are getting is the answer, because to do anything else would be to erode their business model. In fact, what they're giving us is one tool for understanding where the true nature of our challenge lies. And that's important to recognize, that the things that enable us can also constrain us.
It's analogous to, and I want to come back to this, in neuroscience, there seems to be this explosion of interest in the brain, the neuroscience, and in part that's driven by a radical reduction in the cost of a certain technology that allows you to sort of look into essentially blood flow in the brain and then sort of test people in all these different kind of conditions. And yet it's a completely, it's still a complete abstraction. The location of activity in the brain, gives us one clue as to how the brain might work, but it's so far from understanding the sort of true mechanisms and the deep mechanisms, the chemistry and the magic.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the vast majority of the conversation about neuroscience in organizations is self-delusion and fiction. There's a great temptation to move to certainty too early. What does neural imaging gives us? Well, it gives us a view. But, what did we learn from Marshall McLuhan's work and beyond is that, well, the frame around that view is what counts. And we may be able to see electrical activity. We may be able to see blood flow. It may give us one answer, but one answer is not the answer. It's not necessarily generalizable. And also in a reductionist approach, we are seeing snippets of a complete picture. And the thing we know about the brain is it's incredibly plastic. It's able to rewire and rework itself in many different ways. So certainty isn't an issue if we are willing to relinquish it. I was having an interesting conversation about morality and ethics with a naval officer earlier today, and he was asking if somebody who demonstrates great arrogance and certainty may also be humble. And I said, well, they can if they're willing to question their own certainty. So, this is the thing. We have to have an ability to take these emergent insights and work and to form certainty. And we have to be equally willing to put that certainty aside as the evidence demonstrates the need to do so.
So, Julian, a couple of areas that are really intrinsic to your study is the concept of trust. So in this social age, in this age of tremendous change, a couple of things become very, very important. One is leadership. And I know you spend a lot of time thinking about what leadership looks like in a social age. And closely related to that is the concept of trust and how important that is. Can you just sketch out for us at a conceptual level how those pieces fit into